Pirates faced storms that could snap massive ships like twigs, yet somehow lived through nights that should have killed every soul aboard. The impossible survival tactics they used during these hellish tempests will blow your mind completely. When darkness fell on the open ocean, everything changed. The gentle rocking that seemed almost peaceful during daylight turned into something completely different once the sun disappeared. Ships that had sailed smoothly for hours suddenly found themselves fighting for survival against nature's most violent tantrums. Picture this: waves taller than a 4-story building crashing down on wooden vessels. We're talking about walls of water reaching over 50 feet high, enough to swallow entire ships whole. These weren't your typical beach waves either. Ocean storms created monsters that could flip a 200-ton vessel like it was a toy boat in a bathtub. But here's where things got really nasty. The wind had a mind of its own at night. Sailors would be steering one direction, confident in their course, when suddenly, within seconds, the wind would completely reverse. Makes sense why so many captains went gray early, right? One moment you're riding the wind, the next it's trying to push you sideways into certain doom. Lightning strikes made everything worse. These weren't gentle flashes lighting up the sky for a romantic evening stroll. We're talking about massive bolts of electricity that could split a ship's main mast clean in half. Imagine relying on that wooden pole to hold your sails, and then watching it explode into splinters right above your head. The sound alone was enough to make grown sailors wet themselves. Then there's the visibility problem. Complete darkness meant crew members couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces, let alone spot dangerous obstacles. Rough seas would toss sailors around like rag dolls, and many simply disappeared overboard without anyone noticing until morning roll call came up short. The weird part is how quickly everything could go wrong. Ships that seemed perfectly fine would suddenly develop serious problems in the dark. Water leaks appeared out of nowhere. Deck boards that had held strong for months would crack and splinter without warning. Survivors from these nightmare voyages all said the same thing. Daytime storms were scary, but nighttime storms were pure terror. Well, you might wonder how crews dealt with these conditions hour after hour. The cold made everything 10 times harder. Wet clothes, icy winds, and no way to get properly warm created a whole different set of survival challenges that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. What's fascinating is that many sailors preferred fighting pirates to facing these natural disasters. At least pirates were predictable. They wanted your cargo, not your life. Storms? They wanted everything and they didn't negotiate. But surviving meant more than just holding on tight and hoping for the best. When those towering waves crashed over the deck, staying warm became a matter of life and death. Sailors wrapped themselves in layers of scratchy wool, then threw oilskin coats on top. But here's the thing about the ocean. It always finds a way in. Water seeped through every seam, every gap, turning their protective gear into soggy, freezing shells. Most ships had zero heated spaces below deck. Think your morning commute is rough? Try spending 3 days huddled with 20 other unwashed men in a cramped hold, all of you shivering like wet dogs. The crew would pile together, sharing body heat and probably some colorful language about their career choices. Frostbite became as common as seasickness. Sailors' hands turned white, then blue, then that scary shade of black that meant trouble. Their feet weren't much better. Smart crews kept moving their fingers and toes constantly, even when exhaustion made every muscle ache. The alternative was losing digits to the cold. And trust me, pirate surgeons weren't known for their gentle bedside manner. Here's where it gets interesting. Some sailors rubbed animal fat all over their exposed skin. Whale blubber, pig lard, whatever they could get their hands on. Romantic, right? But this greasy layer actually worked, creating a barrier against the icy wind. Sure, they smelled like a butcher shop, but they kept their noses and ears attached. Hot drinks were basically mythical treasures during storms. A steaming cup of tea was rarer than finding a mermaid who'd lend you money. Most sailors had to settle for lukewarm water that tasted like it had been filtered through old rope. The lucky ones might get weak broth made from whatever wasn't nailed down in the galley. But here's what really separated the survivors from the casualties. They never stopped moving. Even when their muscles screamed for rest, experienced sailors kept flexing their hands, rotating their shoulders, wiggling their toes inside waterlogged boots. Movement meant circulation. Circulation meant keeping all your body parts for the victory celebration. The cruel irony? Wet clothing that was supposed to protect them became their enemy. Soaked wool lost its insulation properties faster than a politician loses campaign promises. Ice formed on beards, eyebrows, even eyelashes. Some sailors looked like walking icicles by morning, assuming they made it to morning. And just when you think sleeping in those conditions was impossible, well, crews had to find ways to catch rest between the chaos. The human body can only take so much punishment before it starts shutting down systems. But getting quality sleep while your ship bucked like an angry bull? That required some serious creativity and nerves of steel. When towering waves threatened to snap a ship like a twig, sailors had some clever tricks up their soggy sleeves. These weren't your typical Boy Scout knots either. Extra ropes called preventer stays became a ship's best friend during storms. Think of them as the ship's version of a really tight belt after Thanksgiving dinner. These thick ropes wrapped around the hull, literally holding the wooden planks together when massive waves tried to twist the entire vessel into driftwood. Without them, ships would split apart faster than a cheap umbrella in a hurricane. But what about all that water trying to turn your ship into a submarine? Emergency pumps worked overtime, moving nearly 100 gallons of water per minute. That's like emptying 4 bathtubs every 60 seconds. The crew took turns cranking these pumps by hand, and let me tell you, after an hour of that workout, your arms felt like overcooked pasta. Some sailors joke that pumping water was the only time they missed being on dry land doing farm work. Then there's the genius invention called storm anchors. These weren't your regular anchors, though. Made from canvas and rope, they looked more like giant underwater parachutes. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Deploy one of these bad boys, and it would slow the ship down while keeping the bow pointed straight into the waves. Face the waves head on, and you might survive. Let them hit you sideways? Well, that's when things got interesting in all the wrong ways. When water inevitably found its way through the hull, quick thinking saved lives. Crews patched leaks using whatever they could grab. Lead-line canvas was the fancy option, but desperate times called for creative measures. Wooden plugs, boots, hats, and even the occasional unfortunate rat got stuffed into holes. One sailor's memoir mentions using his lucky sock to stop a leak, though he never explained why that particular sock was considered lucky. Pirate crews had their own system that was surprisingly organized for a bunch of lawless sea rogues. They marked hull sections with chalk lines to track rising water levels. Smart pirates could spot trouble early and direct repairs exactly where needed. Makes sense, right? You can't steal treasure if you're sleeping with the fishes. The real trick wasn't just having these tools, though. It was knowing when and how to use them while waves the size of 5-story buildings crashed over your head. Timing was everything. Deploy that storm anchor too late, and the waves would spin your ship like a carnival ride nobody wanted to board. These protection tactics separated the experienced crews from the fish food. Every rope, pump, and patch job bought precious time against nature's fury. Of course, having all the right equipment meant nothing if you couldn't get any sleep while using it. Getting any sleep during a raging storm at sea? Well, that was like trying to nap on a carnival ride designed by someone who clearly hated comfort. The crew had to work in shifts, grabbing maybe 4 hours of rest if they were lucky. But here's the kicker. Those who managed even this broken sleep had 60% better survival odds than the poor souls who stayed awake all night. Most sailors tried sleeping in hammocks, which sounds peaceful until you realize these things swung like pendulums gone mad with every massive wave. Picture trying to doze off while being tossed left, right, up, and down in a fabric cocoon. The hammocks would crash into the ship's walls with each roll, then swing back and smack into other crew members. Makes sense why nobody got quality rest, right? Then there were the ropes. Strong ropes became lifelines, literally. Sailors would tie extra lines around their hammocks to prevent them from becoming human pinballs bouncing around the lower decks. Some clever crew members even tied themselves into their hammocks. Sure, it might look ridiculous, but drowning in your bed because the ship suddenly tilted wasn't exactly a dignified way to go. But the real problem wasn't just the movement. Most sailors barely slept at all because they had to stay alert for disaster. One moment you're finally drifting off, and the next moment water is gushing through a new crack in the hull, or the ship tilts at such a dangerous angle that everyone thinks this might be it, the moment they all slide into Davy Jones's locker. And the noise? Good grief. The noise was absolutely relentless. Storm winds howling through the rigging sounded like banshees having an argument. Waves crashed against the hull with the force of sledgehammers. Wood creaked and groaned as the entire ship twisted like a pretzel under the pressure. This symphony of chaos could continue for days without a single quiet moment. The weird part is how some old-timers claim they eventually got used to it. They'd curl up in the most impossible positions and somehow catch a few winks between the worst crashes. Maybe desperation made them creative, or maybe their bodies just gave up fighting the chaos. Let's not forget that staying awake wasn't really a choice for many. Someone had to keep watch for leaks, listen for dangerous sounds, or be ready to jump into action if the ship started taking on too much water. Sleep became a luxury that most couldn't afford. Of course, even when nature finally gave the crew a break from the storm, they still faced some pretty basic human needs that became surprisingly complicated at sea. When nature calls during a raging storm, you've got a real problem on your hands. And let me tell you, sailors back then didn't have the luxury of indoor plumbing or even a decent bathroom door. Most ships had what they called the head, basically a wooden plank with a hole cut out, positioned right at the front of the ship. Talk about getting the full ocean experience. This delightful facility hung directly over the churning waters below, completely exposed to every gust of wind and crashing wave. Makes sense, right? Nothing says comfort like doing your business while salt spray whips across your backside. But here's where things get truly terrifying. During violent storms, using this exposed toilet meant risking your life. One wrong move, one massive wave, and you're gone forever into the black, freezing water. Sailors had to time their visits carefully, waiting for brief, calm moments between the worst waves. Some poor souls would grip the ship's rigging with both hands just to stay aboard. Well, necessity breeds creativity. When storms raged for hours, crew members often resorted to buckets below deck. Privacy? Forget about it. Everyone just had to deal with the awkward reality of sharing cramped quarters with 20 other guys and a collection of sloshing waste buckets. The smart sailors learned to read the storm patterns. They'd watch for those precious few seconds when the ship wasn't tilting at impossible angles or getting pounded by 50-foot walls of water. Quick in, quick out, and pray the ocean doesn't claim you for such a basic human need. And the weird part is, hygiene became almost impossible during these conditions. Whatever waste accumulated got tossed overboard as fast as humanly possible. Nobody wanted extra mess rolling around the deck when the next big wave hit. But storms could last for days, and staying clean became a luxury few could afford. Then there's the disease factor that nobody talks about. After surviving a brutal storm, crews faced another enemy: illness spreading through their soaked, unsanitary living conditions. Without proper cleaning facilities or dry clothing, infections and stomach problems ran rampant. Some historians believe more sailors died from post-storm sickness than from the actual tempests. The truly desperate times called for truly desperate measures. During the worst conditions, some sailors just held it for dangerous lengths of time, risking serious health problems rather than venture onto that exposed death trap they called a toilet. Others fashioned makeshift chamber pots from whatever containers they could find below deck. But even surviving the bathroom situation was just one piece of the puzzle. While crews struggled with basic human needs, they also had to worry about something equally critical: keeping their precious cargo from destroying the ship from the inside out. Cargo wasn't just stuff sitting around waiting to get tossed about like laundry in a washing machine. This was survival equipment, food, weapons, and anything valuable enough to risk your neck for on the high seas. When storms hit, protecting it became a matter of life and death. Heavy cargo got the royal treatment with extra ropes and nets before every single storm. Makes sense, right? One loose cannon rolling around could punch a hole straight through the hull faster than you could say, abandoned ship. Crews spent hours checking these ties, knowing that a 200-pound barrel of rum breaking free wasn't just expensive, it could literally crush someone's skull or smash through the ship's wooden ribs. But here's where pirates got creative with their cargo zones. Some ships built wooden barriers down in the hold, creating little compartments to stop everything from sliding around like marbles in a shoebox. Think of it as the world's first shipping containers, except made from whatever planks they could spare and a whole lot of prayer. The smart crews always placed lighter cargo deeper in the hold. Cloth, spices, letters, anything that couldn't survive a soaking got buried under the heavier stuff. Water damage meant lost profits, and lost profits meant angry captains with very sharp swords. Then there's the absolutely wild part about emergency repairs. Pirates would use literally anything to plug leaks when their cargo holds started flooding. Ship logs mention using wheels of cheese, bags of flour, even fancy silk clothing stuffed into cracks. One captain reportedly ordered his crew to sacrifice a barrel of expensive wine to seal a leak, though some historians suspect the crew might have accidentally drunk half of it first. Well, the cheese thing wasn't just desperate thinking. Hard cheeses could actually work pretty well as temporary plugs since they'd swell up when wet. Who knew dairy products made decent nautical repair supplies? Your grandmother's cheddar might have saved more ships than we'll ever know. Crew members took turns checking cargo throughout storms, crawling through the dark, wet hold with nothing but flickering lanterns. Every creak and groan meant potential disaster. A shifted load could throw off the ship's balance, making it roll over completely. And the weird part is how methodical they had to be about weight distribution. Too much cargo on one side meant the ship listed dangerously. Too much toward the back meant the bow lifted out of the water, making steering impossible. Getting it just right required experience that most sailors learned the hard way, if they lived long enough. But even with all these precautions, cargo protection was only part of staying alive during those hellish storms. The real test came down to whether the crew had the skills and mental toughness to execute everything perfectly when death was breathing down their necks. When storms hit, the difference between living and dying came down to one thing: working smart, not just hard. Exhausted sailors made deadly mistakes, which is why smart captains rotated their crews every few hours. Fresh hands meant steady hands, and steady hands kept everyone breathing. But here's where it gets interesting. Navigators had to plot courses while getting pummeled by waves and blinded by sheets of rain. They relied on something called soundings, dropping weighted ropes to measure water depth even when they couldn't see their own feet. Talk about working blind. These guys were basically playing the world's most dangerous guessing game. Then there's the repair situation, which honestly sounds like a comedy sketch. When your ship starts falling apart in the middle of nowhere, you use whatever you can find. Survivors reported mixing tar with animal hair to seal cracks. Animal hair? Some crews even stuffed their own clothing into holes. One account mentioned sailors using their breakfast porridge as emergency sealant. Makes sense, right? That stuff could probably hold a house together. Leadership made all the difference, though. Captains who panicked usually ended up feeding the fish. The ones who stayed calm and gave clear orders, their crews had a fighting chance. Well, there's something almost magical about a steady voice cutting through chaos. When everything's going sideways, literally, hearing someone who knows what they're doing can keep a crew from losing their minds. And the weird part is how creative these sailors got under pressure. They'd tie themselves to masts with their own belts to avoid getting swept overboard. Some crews developed hand signals because shouting was useless against howling winds. Others created buddy systems where each sailor was responsible for keeping track of one other crew member. Teamwork wasn't just helpful, it was survival. When waves crashed over the deck, sailors formed human chains to pass buckets and supplies. They'd take turns sleeping, so someone was always watching for danger. Even the tough guys had to swallow their pride and ask for help when their hands went numb from cold. The smartest crews also learned to read weather signs that others missed. Cloud formations, wind shifts, even the way seabirds behaved, all clues about what was coming next. Experience taught them when to batten down and when to make a run for calmer waters. But why did some ships make it while others didn't? Pure stubbornness played a huge role. The crews that refused to give up, who kept patching leaks and adjusting sails hour after hour, outlasted storms that claimed better-equipped vessels with weaker-willed sailors. Only the ships combining clever tactics with unbreakable determination survived nature's worst tantrums. No amount of supplies or fancy equipment could replace human grit and the refusal to quit when death came knocking.